Good morning, you beautiful people. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar. I'm filling in for Brian today. Coming up on today's show, WNYC and Gothamist transportation reporter Stephen Nesson will be my guest. He'll tell us about a new pilot program that will ask car owners to move their cars fewer times per week in the hopes that it'll increase compliance. Plus, some other reporting Stephen's got on the city's efforts to make the buses faster. Later in the show, for our health and climate story of the week, a look at why states are pulling back on incentives for homeowners to invest in solar panels and how much this is hurting the solar industry. And we'll wrap today's show with a discussion about the value of art and, relatedly, art heists. I'm super excited about it. It's inspired by a new novel by the author of Joe Piazza called The Parisian Heist. She'll be my guest along with an art theft expert named Anthony Amore. But first, there are two wars on the president's schedule today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky are both at the White House this afternoon in separate meetings. For Netanyahu, it's his first sit-down with President Trump since the two of them launched the war against Iran back in February. And both men are expected across town at the funeral of Senator Lindsey Graham. The war itself is in its fifth month. Gas is sitting at about $4 a gallon, and a new Reuters and Ipsos poll out yesterday finds just 1 in 3 Americans support the war. It's the lowest reading since the conflict's early days. 69% are saying the president has never clearly explained what we are fighting for. So we'll start there. Then we'll get into what this war is costing Republicans who are on the ballot in November and the president's effort to change how Americans vote, which his Justice Department asked the Supreme Court to weigh in on yesterday. And with 98 days to go, we'll look at the Senate map. With me now is Jonathan Lemire, co-host of Morning Joe on MSNOW, writer for MSNOW, and contributing writer to The Atlantic. Jonathan, good morning. Welcome back to WNYC.
Good morning. Always glad to be here.
So you reported that late last week, the president was weighing a major escalation in Iran, and then he backed off. What happened?
Well, there are a number of things at play. President Trump, 4 months now, has been trying to put this war behind him. It has not gone nearly as he thought. He was promised that it would last a few days, a handful of weeks at most. As you just say, we're now entering the fifth. It's now been 5 months. After the memorandum of understanding was signed in Versailles, a tentative and fragile ceasefire did take hold for a few weeks. But it was punctuated by sporadic violence on both sides. And then after Iran continued to exert control over the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump, about 2.5 weeks ago at this point, authorized a series of strikes. And for nearly 2 weeks, the U.S. and Iran exchanged fire. The U.S. bombing the Iranian homeland, while Iran struck at our neighbors in the region, including hitting a military base in Jordan that led to the death of 3 American service members. Trump was convened this meeting at the White House on Friday to see if he wanted to escalate further. That was the topic of debate. Did they want to return to an all-out war that we saw back in February and March? Did they even want to consider inserting ground troops into the conflict for the first time, something Trump has been loath to do? But after discussions of several hours, he opted against for fears raised about just dwindling munition supplies, particularly those interceptor defense missiles that are needed to protect our friends and assets in the Middle East, as well as just the economic costs. It's obviously a very expensive war, and potentially the political costs. So for now, Trump opted against an escalation and even brought to an end these new series of strikes, trying to give diplomacy another chance.
So what I hear you saying there is after months of basically a quagmire that was expected to be just a couple days, there were 3 things really that made Trump decide to back off. One, you said, was dwindling supplies. The second was the economic cost. And the third was just the political capital, like the political cost that would take to continue this. Did I hear all that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Now, the White House and the Pentagon pushed back against the thought of the munitions being dwindled, but there's been excellent reporting from, across the board, that they are running low on these missiles, and that they're, if the war were to escalate again, one assumes Iran would strike back and strike back forcefully. And there is real concern about the ability to protect these military bases in the region, and also just our neighbors, the Gulf allies, whether it be Saudi Arabia or the UAE, the list goes on, who have borne the brunt of the Iran retaliation to this point. So that was number one. But yes, and of course there's a financial cost. This war has cost trillions upon trillions of dollars. The Pentagon's last public figures were 30-odd trillion, and people believe it's way more than that. And then lastly, we should, of course, mention the political cost. And you hinted at part of it already. The price of gas.
Yeah.
That Americans are, poll after poll suggests that Americans are deeply unhappy with this war. I think there's a poll out today that only about 1 in 3 Americans think it was worthwhile.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's in part because of the economic costs. They feel like that this is not doing anything to make their lives better, just more expensive.
We had Fred Kaplan from Slate with us yesterday, and we walked through the military side of that decision, and we talked about what you mentioned as the first reason, the dwindling munition supplies, actually, and also that there aren't many targets left worth hitting, and that we burned through, like we said, a lot of our air defenses. You had mentioned the political cost as well. I'd like to dive into that a little bit. Can you go into the political cost of this?
Certainly can. And one further note on the military aspect, you're right. Not only have we sort of run out of targets in Iran, but the president in that meeting on Friday was told that even the strikes that he had authorized for the previous 13 days really hadn't made much of a difference. There was no sign that it was changing the Iranian regime's behavior. But there is certainly a political cost as well. And that is at the center of the debate right now. First of all, let's remember Donald Trump in 2016 railed against the so-called forever wars in the Middle East and promised that he would never dive into one were he to be elected. That, of course, is now a promise he has broken. In 2024, when he staged his remarkable political comeback, that was largely on the backs of his promise to get the economy better. That, Americans were tired of the inflation that came after the pandemic. They were blaming Democrats for that. And Trump, with his businessman credentials, and pointed to his first term when the economy did well, not as well as he claims, but the economy did well, that he would, be able to fix it again. And that simply hasn't been the case. He's done very little to combat inflation. In fact, recent numbers, it's gone up again. And Americans look at this and they see a president who, despite his populist rhetoric from the campaign, has instead catered to his rich billionaire friends and now initiated a war of choice that has only led to increases, to gas most notably, but not just that. Because the Strait of Hormuz has been largely shut, it's been difficult to get goods out of that part of the world. So whether it's fertilizer or food, the list goes on and on. Everything's costing more. And we know that most elections in the United States, particularly midterms, are decided along economic issues, and Republicans are staring at the hand that Trump has left them, and they don't feel great about it.
It sounds like a rock and a hard place of one president's kind of own making. There's a lot going on here, but it sounds like there's no great options. And I'm thinking, so go ahead. Yeah, dive in there.
No, I just was going to emphasize that point. You're exactly right. he's in a complete bind, and it's one of his own creation, because there are some voices on the Republican side, both elected officials, but also some sort of powerful voices in the conservative media who are saying, you know what, this isn't working. It's time to cut and run. Just get out of there. And that would be perhaps a short-term political benefit, and that's the argument they're making, right? That if you leave now and the war fades from the headlines and some sort of deal is broke where the Strait of Hormuz is largely open, and even if Iran to be able to charge some tolls, we'd see prices go down, and maybe Republicans could salvage their chances this November. But geostrategically, that would be a disaster to empower the hardliners in Tehran in two different ways. One, they now know they possess an extraordinary economic weapon in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, exactly.
That this is a waterway that was open and free of use to all before the war. And now Iran might be able to charge tolls and has certainly proven they can close it at any time. But then secondly, if the Americans were to sort of withdraw now from this conflict, then Iran would look at themselves and realize we could strike our neighbors with impunity. And it sure seems like, at least now, during an election year, Trump wouldn't hit back because he wouldn't want to risk the political fallout.
Yeah. Listeners, do you have questions about the war or about the president's meetings today, which we're going to touch on in just a second? We'll also be getting into what this war is doing to Republicans in November, which, Jonathan, you were just hinting at, the fight over how we vote and the midterm map. We'll take your questions and comments for our guest, Jonathan Lemire, co-host of Morning Joe on MSNOW and staff writer at The Atlantic. Call or text us. The number is 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. All right, let's get into the meetings that are happening this afternoon. So Netanyahu is at the White House this afternoon. What does the president want out of this meeting? What's on the agenda?
Yeah, both meetings extremely important today. Let's go into them one by one. But starting with Netanyahu, this is the relationship between these two men, very tumultuous. They were close allies in Trump's first term. They had a falling out because Netanyahu committed the sin in Trump's eyes of recognizing that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. But Netanyahu has worked very hard to patch that relationship up. And certainly he was one of the loudest voices pushing Trump into this conflict with Iran back in February. We should note one of the other loudest voices was Senator Graham, who, of course, will be remembered today at the Washington funeral. And Netanyahu, I think at this point, needs Trump more than the reverse. Trump, we have seen, there's been great reporting in the New York Times, Axios, Atlantic, and other places about Trump's frustration with Netanyahu, about the conduct of the war in Gaza, but also how this war in Iran has gone. He feels like he did not get what he bargained for here. Netanyahu is expected to press the case today that the war should continue and ramp up again. Netanyahu, of course, faces a re-election this fall. He knows that Trump is still a popular figure in Israel. We should note, less popular today than he was a few months ago, because there's some in Israel who are upset that it seems like Trump has tried to put a little bit of a leash on Netanyahu, is trying to rein him in terms of what he can do in attacking Iran, because Trump wants a diplomatic exit here. But this is going to be an important meeting as to whatever the next steps of this conflict may be.
To your point about that demand differential, where it sounds like Netanyahu needs more right now, is in a state of like lower. He's asking for more here. Our understanding is that Netanyahu had been pushing for this meeting for months, and the president kept putting it off. Is that a sign of the dynamics you're hinting at? Is there something else going on? Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's part of it. There's a lot of friction between these two men right now. And the Israelis were blindsided just a couple weeks ago when President Trump suddenly announced his deal with Saudi Arabia to allow them access to nuclear technology enrichment program. Now, that has since cooled off because Trump did then, at the 11th hour, say that Riyadh had to normalize relations with Israel before that could happen. Saudi said no, because they're saying, well, the Palestinian state needs to be agreed to. But I bring that up as just an example of one of the many points of friction between these two men. Now, I believe this is Netanyahu, I think, his 8th visit with Trump in Trump's second term, which is by far the most of any foreign leader. So that shows that these two men's fates are pretty intertwined right now. But there's no doubt the relationship has really cooled in recent months. Netanyahu has wanted this meeting, couldn't get it until today. He, of course, is in town for the funeral. And there are those in Israel, in Netanyahu allies, who think this is sort of his last best chance to re-engage Trump on the conflict and to try to mend that relationship before Netanyahu stands for re-election.
So you're saying last chance, as in probably unlikely that he would come back or have an opportunity until Netanyahu's next election this fall, or is there more going on there?
Well, that could be, but also I just think that Trump is so clearly eyeing the exits of this war.
I see.
So that if there's not another meeting for months, let's say, and now the two men may meet on the sidelines of the UN, in September, assuming Netanyahu comes, and the belief is that he will for the General Assembly. What's the story topic of conversation?
That's right. That's another segment.
Yeah, certainly is. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
That is, so maybe they would have a chance to meet again then. But that's even now, that's 6-7 weeks from now?
Yeah.
And who knows what sort of deal Trump may have struck with Iran between now and then.
Got it. Let's go to Zelensky. So Zelensky's at the White House today, too. Reuters says that the relationship has been warming, kind of the opposite of what you're describing with Netanyahu. And as Ukraine has blunted Russia's advances, while Netanyahu is walking into a building that's frustrated with him over Iran. So it's the same afternoon, two very different welcomes. What does Zelensky have right now that Netanyahu doesn't?
Zelensky right now has the whiff of being a winner. And we know President Trump is drawn to winners. He likes to associate himself with winners. And it's a remarkable turnaround. It was last February, so 15-ish months ago, when Zelensky and Trump and Vice President Vance got into a shouting match in the Oval Office, and the Ukrainians were thoroughly were thrown out of the building. They didn't eat the lunch because of how badly that had gone. And we know that Trump, has taken swipes at Zelensky time after time, and his instinct is to defer to Putin instead. But what's happened in the last few months is a couple of things. I'm told U.S. intelligence has shown Trump, and he's finally starting to believe, that actually Ukraine is handling itself okay in this war. For months, even though the facts on the ground were that Ukraine had blunted the Russian offensive, Trump and some of the senior advisors, just thoroughly hammered the line that Russia was winning, Russia was going to win, and Zelensky should just cut a deal. They're now seeing, finally, that that's not the case. That, yes, of course, Russia is still inflicting real damage in Ukraine. They've shown the ability to hit Ukrainian cities and kill Ukrainian civilians. But Ukraine's been able to take the fight back. They're able to reclaim some territory on the battlefield, but also strike targets within Russia, particularly with the advancements they've made in drone technology. They've surpassed the United States in these drones. And I think that there's finally a recognition in Trump's Washington, first for the Pentagon, that maybe it'd be worth it to make a deal with Ukraine to have access to some of this technology for our own purposes, but that also right now Zelensky has momentum, and Zelensky has done a better job of managing this relationship. I mean, look, it's a powder keg. It could go at any time.
Sure.
But right now, the Ukrainians are coming into this meeting feeling far better about the chances that could get Trump to help more, or at the very least, continue to stay out of it and not side with Russia, giving Ukraine more of a chance to keep making progress.
That term that you use, I think is so crucial for me, at least as I think about this, is momentum. You use that word momentum and I think smelling a winner is another term that you use there. It explains so much about this relationship of Trump between these two opposing parties, Zelensky on one hand, Netanyahu on the other. And it is, I think, crucial to look at it as this interesting narrative of how folks are trying to navigate everything. And we have a text here that I want to go to, which brings us back to Hormuz quickly, but I think is worth looking at for the larger geopolitical ways that all of these things are coming together. It says, why couldn't the U.S. simply declare the Hormuz Strait international water under international law and send whatever ships needed to keep it open? Because in a second, we're going to go on to talk more about the Strait of Hormuz. So I was wondering if you could reply to that, Jonathan.
Well, there was a brief operation a few months ago where the U.S. was going to escort ships through the strait, so akin to what you're suggesting here. But it fell apart pretty quickly, in part because the Saudis declined our request to use their air bases for the aircraft that we needed to fly in support for these ships. And Trump came off that idea. There certainly is the possibility that the U.S. would send more assets back to the region to provide these sort of escorts, and that may be the solution. But the short-term impact would be there would be more violence. Those ships would likely come under attack from Iran, and Trump to this point has shown very little tolerance for any American casualties. Right? He has again and again opted against sending any sort of ground troops into this conflict. And I think that in part that's a genuine squeamishness. He's the commander-in-chief. He doesn't want to see American lives lost.
Sure.
But he also knows that the political cost would be immense. So I think that is still a card that could be played down the road. And I think that certainly our allies in the region have made clear that they find the status quo unacceptable, that they will not pay Iran tolls to use a waterway that until recently was free, because they know that money Iran will turn around and just simply use to rebuild not just their cities, but their military. And they don't want to be menaced by that again. They don't want to be seen as helping Iran pick itself back together again. So the whole solution is out there, but I think there'd be a lot of pressure for that not to happen. Could the U.S. do something like this caller suggests? possibly.
Meanwhile, gas has gone from about $3 a gallon before the war to just over $4. Do you think that's the key number that Republicans that you're talking to on the Hill are watching?
Yeah, there's a real psychological impact to that when that first digit becomes a 4. I have told this story, perhaps even on this air before, but during the Biden administration, his first chief of staff, Ron Klain, they took the office, during the supply chain issues coming out of the pandemic. He said the very first thing he would do every morning, some days even before checking to see if the president was trying to reach him, was check the price of gas, because he knows how important that is. Bill Clinton talked about how, because gas stations have the prices displayed outside, they're literal billboards on the sides of most American roads that give so many Americans a snapshot of how the economy is doing. It carries outsized importance, the price of gas. Everybody knows what the price of gas is, even if you don't know the cost of other everyday goods. People know because they see it every day.
Hey, they're billboards. I love that. I love that reference. I don't think I've ever thought about that before. Sorry to interrupt you, but just billboards is so interesting to think about that. Sorry, go on.
They're literal billboards. So it's the one thing everybody knows what costs. And so therefore, it carries outsized weight. And there's been a number of elections in decades decided in part because of the price of gas. And the Trump team is well aware, and Republicans on the Hill are well aware of this too, which is part of why they were so eager to sign that ceasefire agreement some weeks back, because when they did, we saw the price of gas decline. It has since picked back up because of the resumption of hostilities. So that's hovering over all of this.
Let's go to a caller. We've got Frederick in Princeton, New Jersey, who's got a question for you, Jonathan. Frederick, hi, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for taking the call. I have a question. Rolling the camera fast forward, how are we supposed to trust the Republican Party in any way, shape, or form? The discussions we have at the college and also in the coffee shops is how can we trust the Republican Party with the way they have behaved and backed Donald Trump and the way they look at a dictator as a strong man? I mean, so many things never really go away. They just submerge and they wait for the next personality to bring it out. So how can we deal with the Republican Party or even our Republican friends, which I don't trust at all, by the way, because they still support Donald Trump in this terrible situation that we're in right now?
Frederick, thank you so much for that call. Trust is a big word. Jonathan, I'm wondering if you hear those similar questions, how you think about it.
Well, certainly Republicans going forward are going to have to grapple with that issue. I mean, look, there's a percentage of the population that will always simply vote for the GOP no matter what. But for Democrats and those swing voters who so often decide elections, we can see it in the polls. They're unhappy with Trump. They are unhappy with the Republican Party. And I think it will take, for those people, I suspect they will say, well, it's going to take a lot to repair our trust. And maybe we need to see a whole new cast of characters in the Republican Party. There are some Republicans who, I guess we'd call them never Trumpers, or who have suggested they think it could take years, if not decades, to repair some of this damage. Then again, man, political cycles in the U.S. go really quickly. I know it feels like we've been living in the Trump era for a long time, and we have. It's been 10 plus years now. But think about other moments where it seemed like there was a almost permanent political revolution, right? When George W. Bush in 2004, riding high in the Republicans, swept Congress. We thought Karl Rove talked about a permanent Republican majority. That only lasted a couple of years. It was gone. 2008, when President Obama scored his landmark landslide victory and the Democrats stormed back to power, there was talk there that maybe the Democrats had put together this new coalition that could be a durable ruling class. Well, 2 years later, Republicans and the Tea Party got back to House. So these things go quicker than you think. But I agree that the Trump moment feels significant. I think some would argue that the damage done to the Republican Party, but even the country, will take longer to repair. But that is one of the many questions facing the political world and the nation as a whole as we start to consider what a post-Trump America would look like.
Before we go to a break, we have time for just one more caller, then we'll come back for more, of course. But let's hear from Rabbi Eli in Lakewood, New Jersey. Hi, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'd like to dispute some of the things that the guest was talking about. First of all, 4 months of an on and off war is far from a forever war. Trump did not break his promise at all. On the other hand, Trump did keep his promise that under no circumstances whatsoever would he allow Iran to go nuclear. And as far as everyone knows, they were on the verge of going nuclear. The war is very, very justified, and everybody knows the justification for the war. There's no need for any explanation. Everybody knows the biggest threat to the entire world was Iran and its pursuit of nuclear weapons. As far as polls are concerned, polls come and go, and they change based on the news. And the midterms are a long time from now. As far as gasoline prices are concerned, nobody has any business complaining about the rise of gasoline prices if they didn't thank the president for lowering Biden's high gasoline prices. So first of all, you should be speaking against Biden's high gasoline prices. You should be thanking the president for having lowered them for this amount of time. In construction, sometimes you put up a sign, pardon our appearance while we do construction to serve you better. In a few months from now, presumably, the war is over, Iran is decimated, Iranian oil is flowing, the media will quickly change the subject instead of giving Trump the credit for lowering the gasoline prices down to $2 a gallon, just as we saw with the whole egg situation, beating up on Trump when eggs are almost $10 a dozen. Now it's $1 a dozen. Completely changed the subject. No thanks. No.
I find, Rabbi Elliott, thank you so much for that call. I find that construction sign metaphor, I guess analogy in this case, to be very interesting. Jonathan, I'm wondering, how did that resonate with you? We heard Rabbi Eli give justifications for a lot of the points, against a lot of the points that you were saying. 4 months isn't too long. We're going to see in a few months or down the road that this is actually all going to work out. How does that all sit with you?
Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Yeah.
And certainly that is reflective of some of the strong feelings around this issue. I'll just note that U.S. intelligence does not agree with the assessment that Iran was on the verge of a nuclear weapon. There's no signs of progress, since last summer when those attacks were first initiated. There is, in fact, we should also note that President Trump they've moved off of the nuke talk. That's not one of their major concerns right now. As they're trying to find their way out of this conflict. Sure, I mean, there is, of course, no one can predict the future exactly. There is a chance that this will work out, that gas prices will fall again. But right now, what I'm reporting on is how people are feeling about it right now in the White House, in Washington, and Republicans do not think this is going well. And they do not believe, or at least let's put it this way, they are pessimistic that it can turn around between now and November's midterms. And, President Trump, goes after the Biden administration's economic record all the time. But it's simply not true that he inherited the highest inflation ever. And, it came down, but it has now checked back up again because of what we've seen in the Middle East and other factors. But I think that caller is representative of, look, there are very strong feelings about this issue.
Very strong.
About what's going on right now. Of course, we'll just see. Only time will tell where it ends up.
Thank you so much for that call. We're going to take a short break. My guest is Jonathan Lemire, co-host of Morning Joe on MSNOW. When we get back, we're going to dive into some more of what's happening in politics today. Stay with us. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today. My guest is Jonathan Lemire, co-host of Morning Joe on MSNOW, writer for MSNOW, and contributing writer to The Atlantic. Jonathan, I want to turn to another fight that's going to shape November, and it's about the election itself. The president has been pushing to change how Americans vote on two fronts. One is stuck in the Senate and the other moved yesterday. So the Justice Department filed an emergency application at the Supreme Court on Monday over the president's executive order on mail-in voting. What are they asking the justices to do?
For years now, much to the frustration, frankly, of some of his advisors and some Republicans, Trump has railed against mail-in voting. He's convinced himself that it is vulnerable to fraud. He has convinced himself that it is to the Democrats' advantage. So we have seen him now on a number of occasions trying to rein that in or even eliminate it. And let's be clear, there's no evidence of voter fraud. Well, frankly, really much voter fraud anywhere, including with mail-in voting. Some states almost exclusively use mail-in voting because it's more convenient, there's more time, it increases access to the ballot, to the franchise, which is an important American belief. And Republicans and Democrats use it alike. In fact, in a number of elections, until Trump started railing against it, more Republicans would go early voting or mail-in voting even than Democrats, at least in some states. Mm-hmm. This is yet another effort to try to attack that. Legal experts who know more about the workings of the court than I do suggest that they doubt the court would take it up. But we, of course, will have to see. But it is just a piece of Trump's election rhetoric. And we saw that primetime speech about 2 weeks ago where, pretty extraordinary moment. The President of the United States from the White House making completely unfounded claims about election integrity, suggesting once again that the 2020 election was stolen. He's provided no evidence of that. He's wrong. He lost. But so many people, Democrats in particular, worry that he's really just using this as a pretext for challenges to 2026 and 2028.
So can you say a little bit more about what the order specifically asks for, what it does?
It is, I don't have it in front of me, but it is to rein it in or to eliminate it in some states, I believe. They're looking for more checks. And I was speaking to a Democratic consultant just this morning on Morning Joe, who hails from Colorado, who notes that every ballot is checked. There's there's an election inspector who already looks at these ballots. So there's no evidence of any sort of fraud here. And I think that it is more beyond the specifics of what this order would be. It is about a piece of a puzzle, which includes Trump's demands of the Republicans in Congress to pass the Save America Act, where it seems to be that Trump is no longer convinced that he and his party can persuade voters, but rather he thinks their best option is just to prevent them from voting at all.
So let's say that I'm someone who does vote by mail every year. I often do personally, like a lot of our listeners. If this order takes effect, what changes for me?
It would depend how it would play out, but you might not be able to. You'd have to get more ID, or you'd have to go to the polls. Also, we should know, who else likes to vote by mail? Donald Trump. And he did so. Right now, of course, the President of the United States, for security reasons, that would probably make sense rather than him going to his local warehouse. But he has done so for years. It is a convenient and seen as effective and safe way for people to vote. And it is baffling to even some Republicans why Trump would want to get rid of it. And then you combine that with some of these Save America Act provisions, which require far more stringent ID laws. In fact, some states' driver's licenses would no longer qualify. And I know Republicans have disputed this, but there are some beliefs and provisions could prevent many American women from voting if they changed their name after they got married.
The president posted on Truth Social yesterday morning that Senate Majority Leader John Thune shouldn't let the Senate leave town until it passes the Save America Act, or better yet, terminates the filibuster. Thune walked into the Capitol a few hours later and told reporters they've already voted on this thing 4 or 5 times and, quote, "Show me how this ends. What's the picture of victory at the end?" Who wins that one?
Well, right now, this is a rare moment where, I think Senate Majority Leader Thune gets the final say. He is well aware of the vote count. He has whipped these votes. They've taken the measure to the floor. It's not going to pass. And he has steadfastly refused to throw away the filibuster in order to get it through just on party lines. Because, he says, I'd argue reasonably, if you get rid of it now, well, it's gone. And then the other party, when they become back in power, when Democrats capture the Senate again, which could be as soon as this November, but certainly will happen again, they'll be able to pass their agenda too with much more ease because there wouldn't be a filibuster anymore. So Trump is angry. The relationship between Trump and Thune is one worth watching. Trump, we had Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, last week say that Trump is, quote, running out of patience with Thune. Trump tried to downplay that yesterday. He was speaking to reporters on Air Force One. en route to an event in Michigan, and he said his relationship with Thune was fine. But he reiterated his call for Republicans to stay in Washington and work on this. Well, the problems with that is twofold. One, as you just said, it's not going to pass anyway, it looks like. So therefore, you're just saddling Republicans with an unpopular position. Like, they've got to talk about this and maybe vote on it again when polls suggest Americans don't want it. But secondly, you're suddenly trapping Republicans in Washington, and those who are in tough re-election fights this November, well, they would much rather use that time, not in D.C., but back home actually campaigning.
Can we go back to that first point? Because just last month, the president said himself that 4 Republican senators, maybe 5, will never vote for the bill. So why keep pushing something he's already called dead?
It reeks of desperation. It is. The White House has not been able to offer a coherent case, at least not that I've heard, for why it could pass now. I mean, he's just sort of banking on some senators to change their minds or Thune to cave to blow up the filibuster. But even then, it's not clear that it would pass. And it seems that, I mean, first of all, let's just note, this is a Congress that has passed an extraordinary little amount of legislation since taking office a year and a half ago. Yes, the One Big Beautiful Bill Tax Act last year, sure. There was this bipartisan housing bill they did get through a few weeks ago that Trump himself refused to sign. And now, but Trump is just fixated on this. And again, let's connect it to that speech he gave 2 weeks ago. He's using an extraordinary amount of political capital at a moment where he's starting to run out of it, right? I mean, yes, he's still popular among Republicans, though less than he used to be, but no doubt, he is still the dominant force in the Republican Party. He's already technically a lame duck. After November's midterms, he's really going to feel like a lame duck, and the political conversation is going to start to move on to the race to replace him. So this is sort of feels like one of his last-ditch efforts to get something big done, and he's doing it out of fear, it would appear, because he's afraid that the Republicans are going to lose this November. And remember, if the Democrats even get one House of Congress, they might get both, but even if they just get one, then A, they can fully block whatever else Trump wants to do legislatively. But B, and perhaps more importantly, they'd have the power of the subpoena, and they can start ordering up investigations into the Trump administration, into his allies and the like. They could even try to impeach him again if they wanted, but it would make his last 2 years sort of miserable, and he's trying to avoid that.
I'm so happy that you brought up that last point, because I want to dive into how that could actually happen this fall. So Democrats need to flip 4 seats. Republicans, I've seen quoted, concede that they could lose 1 to 3. So where is that 4th seat?
Well, I mean, first let's remember, the Democrats could just take the House. And that would be enough. They don't even need the Senate but to have the power of the subpoena. And both parties anticipate the Dems will flip the House. I mean, things can change. We are still a few months from Election Day. But right now, Democrats would be favored to take the lower chamber. So that'd be enough.
Okay.
But in terms of the Senate, it's a good question, because the map is so interesting. And I think that it's far more wide open than we would have thought even a few months ago. Look, Democrats have long thought their best pickup opportunities, North Carolina. They feel good about North Carolina. And maybe Maine, although obviously with the Grand Platter situation, Maine is much more topsy-turvy now than it looked. As Democrats now race to have a new candidate with 98 days to go until Election Day. But the pickup chances, there are others that suddenly are in play. It could be Iowa. It could be Alaska. It could be Ohio. Maybe Texas, along the white whale for the party. While Republicans see far fewer. Now, Republicans have some good defense. They'll hang on to much of these seats. And the map going into this year was favorable to them. But the Republicans just are feeling antsy about this. I mean, they feel better about Susan Collins' chances now than they did 6 months ago. They now think Michigan is the one. That's the one where they feel like they could take, as the Democratic primary there has gotten really heated. But the possibilities are there for Democrats. Democrats have the enthusiasm. At times maybe not the money they need, but like the board is wide open, shall we say? And again, even just taking one of the 2 houses would deeply complicate the next 2 years for President Trump.
That is a wider board than I expected before talking to you today, because you listed, I was keeping notes, you listed 5 states right there, and they're looking for 4. And it sounds like there might be even more beyond that. Is that too much of an exaggeration?
No, it's not. I mean, I don't have the list I don't have a map in front of me, but off the top of my head, I mean, there might even be a couple or more. Like one seat, again, 6 months ago, the Republicans thought they might have a shot at with Georgia, John Ossoff's seat. They no longer really think that. Again, nothing's done until it's done. But Ossoff has a pretty solid lead in the polls and a lot of momentum. So I think Georgia is falling by the wayside for Republicans. Now, look, some of these will be a stretch. I mean, I think most Democrats I talk to say they'll believe they win Texas the day it actually happens because they've come close before and never can quite get it done. Ohio and Iowa are states that have both really trended red in the last 20 years, particularly in the Trump era. But Democrats feel good about their candidates in both of those races, and they see unpopular Republican positions and really tough poll numbers for the GOP. So they dare to dream a little bit. So yeah, this is in play. You know, and I think the consensus when I talk to people on both sides of the aisle, the consensus would be this, and I'll just to your listeners. The House right now is so far from a sure thing that people lean Democrat. The House, people think it's going to go there. And the Senate feels like a true toss-up, a real 50-50 game.
Let's end on the GOP here. So your colleagues at MSNOW reported yesterday that the president's own political operation is quietly telling candidates they can put some distance between themselves and him on the economy. And meanwhile, he's out there calling it a golden age. So to kind of wrap things up, I'm interested in what is the message Republicans are actually going to be running on?
Well, first, I think there will be limited patience from the White House to actually let Republicans create daylight between themselves and the White House. Yes, no doubt, the reporting is right, and there's been a little bit of a permission structure set, but that could go away in a second when Trump sees an item on Fox News and goes nuts on Truth Social about it. So, I don't think there are too many Republicans who think they can wildly run away from the president. But in terms of the messaging that leaves the GOP, I mean, every time President Trump gets out there on the stump or takes it to Truth Social or talks to reporters in the Oval Office and suggests that affordability is a hoax, that's a bad day for Republicans because poll after poll shows that is the number one issue for Americans. They think things cost too much, whether it's groceries or gas or the cost of housing. The list goes on and on. And Trump, instead of using his powers in bully pulpit to say, hey, we feel, to use the Bill Clinton phrase, we feel your pain and we're going to work on it, he's not doing that. He's not even acknowledging the problem. And that is deeply frustrating to Republicans who are in their home districts, who are in their home states, and hear from voters that is their chief concern. I think the Republicans are going to try to make this about cultural issues. They're going to try to make this about immigration again, although even that's polling not nearly as well as it did for them, say 2 years ago. They're going to lean into these election conspiracy theories. They're going to have to go to the edges because the things that they thought they could run on, frankly, I don't think they can.
Wow. Well, we covered a lot in the past 40 minutes, and Jonathan, I appreciate you being so dexterous and knowledgeable about it. We'll have to leave it there for now. My guest was Jonathan Lemire, co-host of Morning Joe on MSNOW, writer for MSNOW, and contributing writer to The Atlantic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to do it again soon.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.